Tonight we have Charlayne Gault, and she's joined by her daughter Susan. They are going to be in conversation discussing Charlayne's recent memoir, My People, and it is a brilliant chronicle of her work for decades as a journalist. She has an amazing and storied career, and I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating talk for all of you. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and we hope you enjoy. And thank you for Susan and Charlayne for coming and joining us.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to our mother-daughter conversation about my mother's latest publication, My People. My mother gets a kick out of this when she hears it on television, but I can truly say thanks for having me. Charlayne Hunter Gault, journalist, wife, mother, all-around bad mamma jamma. We're all joined together here today to hear the stories about that has given us so much information about the people and situations she has covered for over 50 years. I have a few questions. I have been along for the entire ride, and there's some things that I'd like filled in myself. It is going to be as interesting for me as it is for you. So let's get right to it. Why was it so important for you to get the story right?
That's, as you said earlier, a good question. You know, from the time I was 5 years old, maybe, I was always tall. And my grandmother used to read 3 newspapers a day. Now this is the segregated South, so this is how she connected to the world, reading the newspapers. Well, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I used to sit at her chair on the floor, waiting for her to hand me the comics. And I could read at that age. And so I used to read all the comics, and that's when I fell in love with the comic strip character, Brenda Starr. Now, some of you are too young to remember, but some of you might. Well, Brenda Starr was a creation, actually, as it turns out, I learned many years later, of a woman. Because of discrimination against women and black people and others, they never said that until recently that the creator of Brenda Starr was a woman. But Brenda traveled the world in search of people. And I wasn't, at 5 and 6 years old, I didn't care about her relationship with this one-eyed mystery man. She had a little love affair going with him. But I just loved what she did. And then I went one day to my mother, and I said, when I grow up, I want to be like Brenda Starr. And my mother said in her usual soft voice, well, if that's what you want to do. Considering the time that was and the circumstances of people of black African-American descent, it was an extraordinary answer. And then I go to my elementary school, all black, which suffered the problems created by separate and unequal. Our schools would get the hand-me-down textbooks from the white schools with pages missing. And so every year, the black schools, the principal and the teachers would have a fundraiser. And the people in the community, generally the black people, would go around raising money to make up for these deficits. And there came a time when my mother and my father was in the military. He was a chaplain serving abroad. And so it was just my mother and grandmother. And they knew all of my uncle's girlfriends. They were hairdressers, most of them. well, we didn't have these kinds of those days, but we had pigtails. And so they went to all the hairdressers that my uncle was friendly with. And the night of the event, I saw my mother and grandmother over there counting their nickels and dimes and quarters. And then suddenly, after a bit, I heard, because whoever raised the most money, their child would be crowned king or queen. And I heard, and our new queen is Charlayne Hunter. Well, I wore that crown. I got a bullet watch, a tiara. I didn't really care that much about the watch, but the diamond tiara, I wore it every day for 3 or 4 days, and my classmates, especially the girls, got so sick of me that they were threatening to. So I finally took off the crown. But the notion that I was a queen took up residence in my head. And so it was, and I'll tell you 2 stories about that, but let me go with the queen one first. I took off the crown. But years later, when I was walking onto the campus of the University of Georgia, where there had never been a black student before, I had been ordered by the courts, and I'm walking onto the campus, and a lot of the male students primarily, but I don't know if there were any girls, but they were mostly boys that I heard, and they were yelling the N-word, you know what I'm talking about, go home. I'm looking around for who they're talking about, because guess who I am?
Queen.
The queen. So on my 81st birthday this year, I decided to memorialize my queenness, so I got this and I wear that. But the other thing I got, in addition to the crown, to get back to my darling daughter's question, I learned about another journalist, a black woman by the name of Ida B. Wells.
Yeah.
And Ida B. Wells she was a journalist, she was an activist, she was concerned about her people, my people. And by the way, my people aren't all black, by the way, I just want you to know, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But it was learning about Ida B. Wells and how she managed to be a journalist, reporting what was going on in her communities, but she was also an activist, which was giving people, Jim Lara, when I worked for the PBS NewsHour, and Jim was around, he's now transitioned, but when he was there, one of the things that he used to say is that you give people good information, and they will do the right thing. And so that was what Ida B. Wells was doing. Now, of course, Brenda Starr was doing it too, but that's when I determined that it was important for someone like myself who lived in that community to also try and write about that community in ways that weren't being done, which is how we got to this book. Have I answered that question too long?
No, I was just thinking about which question to ask next based on what you just said. And your article in your July 13th, 1971 article in the book about, it's called 2 Black Women Combine Lives and Talent in a Play. It was a play called Black Girl, written by J.E. Franklin and Chanel Perry. It chronicled the lives of 3 generations of black women. Ms. Franklin's experience with black children in 1964 Mississippi was that they couldn't read because they'd been taken out of school to pick cotton. Because she realized they had a capacity for expression, verbalizing, she got them to talk about their own lives. She recorded them and showed them their own words. They learned to read by speaking their own words. They eventually turned it into a play and toured with it. You, Mother, also have an amazing capacity for expression. You speak a lot about your grandmother's influence on your spiritual vocabulary and how Brenda Starr was one of your inspirations to become a journalist. You were destined to be. But your father also inspired you. He focused on your academic excellence, but he really stressed the importance of using your own words correctly. What was the word, the phrase, I think it was your father that said when you speak with kings, you use the English language correctly, you walk with kings.
That's right.
Well, but you have walked with kings and queens, and you've constantly done that. How did your father's words influence your journey to become a woman of letters who walked with kings and queens?
Did I teach you to be that good?
I had a father too that was a journalist and a writer, kind of doubly cursed and blessed. So,
What was the question?
how did your father's words?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, we are having and I try not to be too controversial because I get into a situation where I'm being attacked for being controversial, because that's not my point. But when I listen to this painful debate, our history, and how some states, including one where I live half the year, I live here half the year and in Florida half the year, trying to remove our history from our schools. It's very painful to me. I mean, every time I talk about it, with tears. Because as I have indicated from talking about what my mother and grandmother did that enabled me to get to be queen, there were people who used our Black history as armor, because our Black history didn't start a few years ago.
Right.
It started back in the hundreds, and even before that in other parts of the world. And so I've often so that you are protected, as I was when I walked onto that campus and they were yelling N-word, go home. I was protected by my history. And there is so much of our history, like I'm doing a panel actually tomorrow at the Old Wayland Church. Is it tomorrow?